The theme for tonight is compelling conflict, designing unforgettable encounters and villains. I guess we don't have any announcements to make, so I think we'll just jump right in.
Announcements are my favorite part, so I'm a little upset, but I know you like the meat, Brett. I like the appetizer, but it's fine.
I guess there'll be announcements at the end, maybe. I don't know. We'll think of some.
Dessert, fine.
Yeah, you got to save for dessert. Okay, Smitty, tell me if this sounds familiar to you. Your DM says, while walking through the dark forest, you hear a twig snap. You swivel around and barely able to dodge out of the way of an arrow. You then roll initiative. The DM describes the field. I guess there's some trees around?
We've all been there. Or maybe your DM has yet again tasked you with bringing down another monster or brigand whose name you can barely recall. Or worse yet, you've been working all campaign to confront the final villain only to find them a little one-dimensional?
Slide 2. Hi, my name is Brett, and I'm the current DM for Geek Attack. With me again is the ever-energetic Smitty. You can watch Geek Attack on this channel every Tuesday at 9:30 EST. We'll have our penultimate session next week, so that should be very exciting. There's a red dragon sieging the town of Brindle, and it's up to our heroes to stop them.
Or to flee in terror.
Or flee in terror. We haven't decided yet.
I have.
Okay. If you remember last time, we had a panel on rewards and RPGs, which sort of turned into me just talking about magic items in 5th edition somehow. But enough about that. Let's talk about what we're going to go over tonight. On the next slide, as you can tell from the title of this panel, we'll be talking about villainous encounters and encounter and villains. I'll be talking about enemy archetypes and encounter design therein, theater of the mind versus battle maps, mythic actions in the new Theros book, and then villainous powers normally unavailable to players.
I'll be talking a bit about the psychology and motivations behind certain villains, how personality and likability drives other villains, how some of the most iconic ones have the kind of facets of being strange and unsettling. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about some tips and tricks you can do to make your characters a little bit more dynamic and usurping your players' expectations.
And I guess with that, we'll get right into the meat of the bones. Jordan, slide 4.
I think that's called marrow, just by the way, the meat of the bones.
Oh, it's the same thing. DMs, how do you design encounters? Do you just throw a couple minis on the battle map? Or I guess if you're using Theater of the Mind, you just call out there are several bandits. What do the bandits do? Well, they have a short bow in their stat block, I guess, and maybe a short sword. So they jump out from behind some trees and then they attack. Your players attack, and eventually after a short back and forth, your players win. How do we make that more evocative? Well, that's why we're here. Firstly, the enemies. Having a bunch of bandits with the same stats makes it easy to run because you're just having one set of stats to use for all the bandits and just keep track of each of their hit points. I feel like it'd be more interesting if the bandits had several different abilities just to keep your players on their toes. For example, one of the bandits can be a rogue and dash past the melee folks to harry the squishy spellcasters. Maybe one of the bandits is a practicing spellcaster himself, throwing a controlling spell out and to keep the melees busy while the other bandits attack the spellcaster. I think you could tell how I usually go about my encounters. Have your enemies attack the spellcaster. Now, way back in 4th edition, enemies did have different roles. That rogue example I gave would be a skirmisher, an enemy that could move around and mess around with the squishy characters. And the spellcaster would be like a controller, able to keep your players busy or stuck while the other enemies did other things. I sort of miss that because, most monsters this edition have their actions as multi-attack, make 2 bites, or multi-attack, make 3 sword attacks. This was kind of exemplified in with the dragons themselves in 4th edition. Instead of the chromatic dragons just being different for what energy type they used, dragons had different roles and different abilities to fill them. Green dragons were controllers, so while doing poison damage, they had the ability to charm people and move them around with their bonus action. And it helped them set them up for more devastating breath weapons. Additionally, ancient green dragons had the ability to amplify the effects of anyone taking poison damage.
And let us not forget the aquamarine dragons, Brad.
Correct. That is the psionic dragons, I believe, from the lesser edition.
They just never get the their due. So I wanted to make sure we
the
give them a shout out.
Yeah, the gemstone dragons. They were from 3.5, I believe, and they had a bunch of psionic abilities that everyone didn't really use because no one really likes psionics for some reason.
I was just making that up, but from what you just said, that sounds like that might have actually been a real thing. So
it was a real thing. I think
there was an aquamarine dragon.
I don't think there was an aquamarine dragon, but there was like ruby and sapphire and something.
Got it. Okay, sorry. Enough of my my imagination run wild.
And back to green dragons being controllers. Additionally, ancient green dragons had the ability to amplify the effects of anyone taking poison damage. If you were poisoned, they could amp it into a stun on a failed save, and failing to save again, you're basically dominated and you're out of the fight. Black dragons were lurkers. Lurkers were generally characterized as enemies that made them difficult to target. If you didn't know, black dragons usually live in swampy waters, so you could imagine a counter with a black dragon as it menaces the group in the murky waters. They had the ability to spit a zone of sick darkness that only they could see through. Since your players can't see out of it, you are effectively blinded, and you are taking damage. This combos well with their breath weapon, because if your party runs out of the cloud in one direction, they're still clumped up. Speaking of dragons, the Council of Worms campaign setting from a earlier edition, I can't remember what it was. I think it was 2nd edition that Psychotic Monk brought up. Apparently, someone brought. Apparently, my producer is saying to slow down. I'm sorry. There's so much I want to talk about villains and stuff that I have to get it all up.
Every time I interrupt Brett, he actually picks up the pace. So I'm gonna.
Yeah.
We're not losing too much time with my idiotic interjections. Don't worry, Brett. You don't have to. Of
course not. No, I'm trying to save time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Apparently that campaign setting was updated for 5th edition with someone's homebrew. I was gonna actually use that those notes and rules to make a sort of like second part of like the campaign I'm running now, where like instead of you guys going after all these like cults of the dragons, you are the cults of the dragons. Anyways, but that's kind of off course. The reason I bring up black dragons is because in the game I currently run on Tuesdays with Geek Attack at 9:30 EST, I tried using a black dragon like this to menace the party as they rowed a boat through the swampy waters of Lake Rest. Unfortunately, it didn't go as well as I thought. The acidic zone of darkness was dispelled in a way I probably shouldn't have let happen, and then the dragon was restrained and couldn't do the lurking part of his lurking role. In retrospect, I should have been a little tougher with the zone and probably had him lurk and menace more.
To be fair, I don't know how much he lurked, but I do feel the party was quite menaced.
Okay. It's hard from the other side when you have all the lights on and you could see the kind of like the Hollywoodness of the backdrop and everything.
Sure. You were dealing with like the green screen and like tennis balls and everything while we were in the swamp and, everything was on fire. I jumped into the water. I don't know. It seemed like a good idea at the time.
I don't know. For some reason, everyone thought the water would instantly sink them. I mean, being in water, you're quite buoyant.
Yeah.
Smitty, do you have any feelings about using monster rolls from prior editions?
I don't, as I think we probably got into a little bit on our last conversation. I am very fly by the seat of my pants. I like wheeling dealing. I think that there are two types of DMs. There are yourself, who kind of is very knowledgeable and can really hit that CR correctly and serve up encounters for their players in a way that they'll remember and will be just very close to where they need to be. And then there's me, who is a little bit more improvisational. So I may grab stuff from other editions and try and mod it on the fly, or just like give a monster a different ability and kind of whap my players with that when they're not expecting it. But ultimately trying to keep everything still manageable for them and try to end up kind of around the same place that you do when you run your games. So for me, I'm all about, I totally can grab inspiration from other games, editions, whatever the case may be. But if you're not careful, you can definitely get into trouble So that's probably something that you manage to avoid more than I do.
Yeah, I think that's another one of the thing I wanted to bring up is that it's cool to customize your monsters like this, but it kind of like a car engine. If you kind of don't know exactly what you're doing, it could blow up in your face real quick. I kind of give these kind of ideas and like thoughts as kind of like things to experiment when you have like a little bit of room within in your encounters. I know that sometimes I feel like I hear some DMs are frustrated when they kind of like punch in the encounter CR into the calculator and it says this should be normal for your group, and they're like, okay, but some monsters punch above their weight class and they feel frustrated that it goes sideways when hypothetically they should have done everything right. So I like to I guess it's a fair warning of make sure you know that this could go sideways very quickly.
Yeah, I think, and again, not to make a call back to the other panel, which is probably somewhere on the Thread Raiders videos if you want to go back and watch it. But I think part of the reason that happens a lot of times is the DMs aren't properly accounting for magic items. And so when you are going into an encounter and you're looking at balancing CR basically just off of party level, if you're a light magic item DM, your players are going to be outmatched. And if you're a heavy magic item DM going into that battle, it's gonna be cakewalk for them. So you do have to take that into account when you're designing these types of encounters.
Yeah, and it's a good thing I am one of the light magic item DMs. You guys only have like 5 or 6 magic items each, so
I don't.
Generally.
I loan mine out.
Oh, that's right. Well, I mean, you would have 5 or 6 magic items each. Unfortunately,
it's an RP choice.
Yeah, you want to be the giving person, the giving tree.
Yeah.
I guess in conclusion to the encounter design bit is just giving your monsters like the cunning action from rogues or something, some sort of ability to inflict status ailments makes the encounter a little more lively and a little more like evocative. But again, the downside is you might bite off more than you could chew. Also, I've learned that you should give your dragon some ability to break grapples. On the next slide, this leads into some pointers, I guess. Spicing up your battle map. I feel a lot of DMs don't take advantage of difficult terrains and objects that block line of sight. With the black dragon encounter I just mentioned, the party was traveling on a 3x3 boat, and after blanking it in acidic darkness, that looked pretty troubling for my party. Because they drop off the boat, now they're stuck in the water where they can't move around as much, and the dragon can shark around them and attack the one furthest from the party. If they don't jump off, they can't target the dragon, and they're taking damage. This fight probably wouldn't work as well if the party was on land and could just freely walk out of the zone of darkness. I think difficult terrain doesn't have to be just like deep water, though. It could be like broken tavern furniture, thick grass, uneven stony ground, and then you could use these areas to kind of control and funnel your players across the battle map. Or you have a couple enemies in reserve hiding, only leaping out when the opportunity strikes. In addition to that, I think height is another thing I don't see too often. I think we've all dealt with the weird pit traps from like 2nd edition, and you have to just jump over them. But to be fighting near the edge of something high up makes it a little bit spicier. Having weird pit traps doesn't really make sense in the middle of like a forest, unless those bandits from earlier were prepared. But I think it's pretty easy to justify in the caves and dungeons. Here's a good example that's not too dangerous, maybe, from the Book of Challenges from 3.5 in the next slide. In case you can't see the picture, let me describe it. The image is the side view of a cave. The G's are gargoyles, and they're hiding in this hidden upper ledge. The players walking in through the lower ledge see a cliff and the cavern continuing on the other side. However, when they move closer to the edge, the gargoyles swoop down, attempting to shove someone off the edge. At the bottom is a carrion crawler, so if the fall doesn't get you, the giant insect might. And now that your party is split, it might be a pretty entertaining encounter, for the DM at least. Smitty, how do you go about using difficult terrain and height and weird terrain advantages in your encounters?
So momentarily, I will tell you about a good height inclusion in a game, height differences inclusion I had in a game. But I want to kind of circle back to one of the things you said about the difficult terrain. I think
Sure.
you can definitely use it to funnel your players, which is, I think an underutilized kind of tactic for DMs. And, often they'll put it to, not really make it like the players like, oh, I'll go this way, but it's still a pretty wide open expanse, right? They're like, just don't go here, as opposed to you have to go here, right?
Right.
And the other thing about that is I don't think they use it enough to change the players. They use it to change the player's location, but they don't use it to change the player tactics, right? Like maybe the only way to get shots off at the villain is from the top of a wide open, exposed ridgeline. And you're going to have to be a little bit different and a little bit smarter about how you're making those attacks. Or maybe you have to go underwater in order to make attacks, and that's going to present its own challenges. So I think that using it not just to funnel them to where the attacks are coming from, but using the terrain to actually change how the players think about combat is a good thing too. The differences in heights thing I wanted to bring up. I had an adventuring party that was kind of being harried through the woods over a course of a couple of hours by a pack of like sort of sentient white wolf creatures. And they were harrying them back to a place where I knew, which was basically like a kind of a mountainous cliffside that they were going to be stuck at the bottom of. But there were a couple of like ledges that they could get on, but there wasn't enough space for everybody. So eventually, they came up with the obvious idea of like, the two more sort of melee characters were at the bottom. They had a bard and a ranger that were at the second level, and then they had their wizard at the top of the hill. They were, they had various climbing things they could do to get there. But what they didn't know is that the wolves been, closing from all directions, and it left the wizard kind of exposed the different top of the hill. So you had the range characters that were just like having a field day, throwing everything they could at these characters, and they felt like they were totally impervious to damage. But eventually, one of the white wolves came out of the woods and actually like one-shotted the wizard, who fell off the side of the cliff because he was fighting at the cliff when it happened, which led for like a great RP moment where he basically was like dead and falling, and it allowed the bard to hit him with a feather fall as he fell past. So he just like floated to the ground in this like almost like Jesus-like caricature, and then left the melee fighters to kind of straddle him as they finished it off. But from that point on, they were terrified of like what else might come out from the different levels of the height. So if they went from feeling like completely secure and they had the battle under wraps to all of a sudden feeling like the height was the biggest thing they had to fear rather than the wolves themselves.
That's funny. I mean, you kind of turned the advantage on them into a disadvantage in that case.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that would be an interesting way for in villains to use the like how to do things like that. I don't know what I'm saying.
I feel like now I'm worried that I hit too close to home on something you're planning on Geek Attack, and we're going to find out that we're going to like be falling from towers soon. So
no, not really.
Whenever you get that way, for the audience out there, when Brett kind of is like, interesting, that usually means that he's got like 2 or 3 of these ideas in the tank to trot out at us during a game at one point. So you gotta pay attention. Our producer is nodding because she's also in the game. So
I guess I can say because this is a past event. Way back near the beginning of the campaign in the game I run, Geek Attack, the players had to traverse to a bridge and destroy it because they found out that the goblin horde was going to traverse it, and by destroying it, they would the goblin horde would need to go around it, making them suffer several days delay. The problem was the bridge was fortified by different goblins and a green dragon. Now, originally in the module that I was inspired by, the tactics it gives for the green dragon is just like, you should just wait until they get on the bridge and just like swoop past them with the breath weapon and just have them like all take their time and be defensive about it because they have the upper hand. And I'm like, I'm gonna kill everyone if I do that. And because it's you're on top of that bridge, like even if you're not being like doused with like acid or whatever, like if the dragon punches you off the cliff, like that's done. Like, so It's a good thing I didn't do that.
Also, I don't think any of us went on the bridge except for Tomlin, which turned out to be the best decision. But
yeah.
Anyway, that's like episode 2 or 3 of Geek Attack if you want to go back and watch those. But
are we plugging our own channel too much?
Well, I think we're plugging because now I think we went the other way, and instead of going too fast, I think now we're just like we've eaten up way too much time.
Oh yeah.
So our producer's trying to tell us that we're fine, but honestly, the whole reason Brett and I do these is so that we can make her uneasy as we go through our.
Pretty much, and just cause her like a bunch of stress by like either going too slow and then she's just like doing the time thing, and then or like just talking too fast and no one can understand us. And
sometimes we freeze, so she thinks her camera yeah.
Anyways, difficult terrain. In conclusion to that overall arcing thought, ambushes don't just have to be a bandit jumps out from a tree or from the shadows and stabs you. Creating blocking terrain features to make your players think twice. Make your players think twice about moving around the map should spice up the encounters. Now you're probably the next slide, Jordan. So now we have a problem because I've been talking a lot about things that will enhance games when you're running on a battle map, but it seems when I watch things on Twitch, that is not really the case. Like, what if you're running combat in the theater of the mind? Well, every complication and abnormality must constantly be stated and stated again. This is mostly why I don't run theater of the mind type combat, because the only true version of events is the DMs, and running a complicated combat just exacerbates the issue. It's actually easier than ever to run a battle map sort of encounter. There's like a multitude of online battle maps, and in person for a long time, I was using just like a large grid paper from your local office supply store and using pennies, nickels, or dimes as the enemies. And then I drew like rough battle maps beforehand and threw the paper down on the table when the battle started, and then drew in the details as needed. So I am firmly on team battle map. What do you say, Smitty?
Well, first I got to ask, did you ever use what are they, loonies or toonies?
That is correct. The dollar coins is a loonie, and the $2 coins is a toonie.
So for those who don't know, Brett's dragons are all Canadian, so it's an important distinction to make. As you probably guessed from my earlier screed on the value of improv, I am a more theater of the mind type DM. I completely understand why you don't want to run sort of terrain intensive or very complicated, complex distancing type combat scenarios without a battle map. It makes sense. That's why you shouldn't do it. I think you have to approach the battle from a completely different mindset when you do that. And I think it's like, why try to convert something that's made for being in person with miniatures with a map into something that isn't that. Just you have to come at it from a different angle. One time it was like one of the PAX panels a couple of years ago, they were talking about converting board games to video games and vice versa. And they talked about a really good example of them trying to convert Magic to a video game. And somebody was like, Magic is like one of the best card games you'll ever see, but it's terrible as a video game because they just tried to make the card game into a video game. Whereas Hearthstone, which I'm an avid player of, came at it from the mindset of like, we're going to make a video game that uses cards. And it's kind of the same thing with battle maps versus theater of the mind. Like, don't try and take a battle map encounter and like slam it into theater of the mind, make a theater of the mind style encounter. And I think that's where kind of DMs who favor opposite sides of the house get into trouble, is when they kind of step across that divide and don't take the opposite mindset when they're now in the kind of opposite frame of reference.
Yeah, I also think there's ways to I think make it easier on yourself. I know other game systems, they use like instead of like movement, you have like things called zones, and you just use like one movement to move from a zone to another zone, where you could, for example, if you're let's say you're fighting at a theater and you have like one zone is the stage. Sorry, my dog is very worried about the things going on outside. One like movement zone is the stage, another two zones are like the seats, and then a third zone could be the balcony section. And so you can the melee types wouldn't have an ability, unless you had an ability to like get to the balcony section, you couldn't just use your regular movement to move between zones. And I feel like that would facilitate theater of the mind encounters better if you like used something like that. The only problem is there's a lot of tiny bonuses in 5th edition where like getting like +5 movement speed is supposed to be something you want to get. So I think you'd have to.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I think this all comes back to, again, it's the play style of the whole campaign, right? Like your players need to know whether or not you're a battle map or a theater of the mind DM to start, because yeah, if you're going to be running campaigns and it's going to be a lot more cinematic in the theater of the mind, that 5 feet extra speed doesn't get you a whole lot. You're not gonna be explaining it into these these scenes in the same way that it would come into play if it was a battle map. So I totally agree with you, but it's that same thing where it's like, you're right. There are lots of things in lots of different games that take advantage of more kind of gritty, what do you call that? Crunchy, like abilities and stuff to get to add to your players, but crunchiness and theater of the mind don't generally go together. So you just have to kind of sand off those edges if you're gonna take that approach.
Yeah, for sure. That's all I kind of really had for I guess battle maps. There's obviously pros and cons of both, as Smitty was saying, and I think it's either you use one or you use the other, and you just kind of have to, I don't know, be aware of their limitations and their advantages. Smitty, have you heard of the latest book for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition? Is the Mythic Odysseys of Theros?
I had not until I saw it in your slide notes, Brett. So why don't you tell me and the audience a little bit more?
Okay. Well, in the new 5e book, it's a Greek kind of inspired setting from the magic universe, apparently. And there are these monsters that not just have legendary actions, but mythic actions. For those not familiar, the monsters that have these mythic actions are generally some sort of like divine avatar. So it's definitely not a everyday thing. Mythic actions are usually triggered when the said divine avatar hits 0 hit points, and afterwards they use this ability to heal a certain amount or to prevent their untimely demise somehow. Thereafter, they get additional actions or their abilities are triggered instantly. For example, a divine avatar of spiders explodes in a burst of webs. In the chaos, she devours her children, restoring her life. Now everyone is stuck in webs, and she's mad. Another example, the divine kraken gets felled by the paladin sword, which cracks the kraken's carapace to reveal several beating hearts. You got to kill them before the beast is finally slain. So now you have to run around and slap all the hearts, and again, the kraken is mad.
Speaking of running around, thanks for the raid. Oh, yeah. I think we were getting to the same thing there, Brad.
Yeah. Thanks for the raid, I guess. Yeah. These two type of changes aren't really a new concept from the world of like video games. One could describe that these like 2 different parts as like life bars, and so you have like the first life bar of the boss where they do their normal thing, and then they have the second life bar where there's an added complication. Smitty, do you feel that this game mechanic is too like video gamey, or do you feel like if it's done well, you'd probably kind of give it a?
I'm for it. I think you can learn lessons from other places. I like the idea of like, great, we moved on to the second stage, especially if that's a type of, I know they're mythic creatures, but like if it's the type of thing where maybe you're aware that these creatures in the past have done that, maybe like some other one, there's a legend about it, etc. And the heroes then kind of get that bump, like, all right, we've made it to like the end game or something. They're not just like, oh, come on, are you kidding me? Like you want them to feel a sense of accomplishment and achievement when they get to that point, because it does make for a really cool setup where they have to change their mindset to attack a new villain that wasn't, the type of villain, the type of encounter that they're in is different, and they have to change and adapt to that. So I'm all for it, but I do think you have to give your players a little bit of kind of like, you have to warm them up for it so they don't feel kind of taken aback when they see it.
Yeah, I feel like if you're using this sort of like game mechanic, you definitely want your players to like be able to learn about this somehow. If they're going against this divine avatar of spiders, they probably want to like, make sure that they have some sort of like freedom of movement ring, or it's like being able to like learn that like she has these abilities. In World of Warcraft, these sort of abilities were kind of, I guess, abused by the devs, where like you'd have sort of a quest encounter with this like named enemy, and you know you're fighting him, and it's like, oh, you're kicking his butt, and then all of a sudden he kind of like stuns you, and he's like, oh, enough, I clearly won that encounter, but I am going to leave now, you have to face me in the dungeon. And it's like, buddy, like I got you 1%, I could see your life bar. And it's like, I feel like there's a way to like frame these where it's not like you're stealing it away from the players, the grasp of victory, where you're just like, oh, I mean, the spider lady, she gets mad and she restores her hit points, and
yeah,
that's all I really had to say about that. I thought the Mythic thing was cool, but
I agree. I think that this is
great.
the problem with our format, man. If we're on the same page about something, we just got to move on to the next thing.
Okay. Spinny, was there any time when you realized that the boss encounter you're running for your players maybe was a little bit went too fast, and you had to kind of amp up the encounter on the fly?
Yeah, like all the time, because I'm a terrible CR planner.
Okay. Maybe you have an example for us.
Yeah, so I dropped a like a black pudding ooze thing into an encounter that wasn't supposed to be there. I just had like a random pot, and the players at the time didn't really question this. So like they were fighting the thing. They were fighting like an assassin vine, and they were just decimating it pretty quickly. So I dropped in this black ooze, which in a small concealed space, it took away their ability to outmaneuver the assassin vine, which is I for some reason hadn't really thought about. And so now they were cramped between these two things. So it made for actually a much better encounter. But it made no sense thematically. And so like while they were worried about this thing that was on the map, in my head I was like, I gotta kind of retcon in my mind why this thing might have been in the pot. And so I was more worried about that. They never asked about it, but yeah, it worked out. This was the most recent example I can think of, but it was close going there for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, like oozes are just kept in pots sometimes. Like it makes sense. Like where else would they be?
I don't know.
Just sliding around.
Possible.
I guess I'll share my example of very recently in our game that I run. I won't repeat the name because we've said it too many times at this point. We only get like 3 or 4 times. The players had to ascend a hellish tower, and at the top was a Araness, I think it's called. And I thought that it would be a decent encounter because of her defensive abilities and her offense. Usually I thought I would be able to kind of do enough damage to put you on the back heel. But what ended up happening is that she got restrained by Smitty's Maximilian's Earthen Hand, and kind of just grappled, and then she got just punched a bunch. So I have extra tokens on the side of the map to make sure that if situations like this happen, there are reinforcements from above to make it so that the encounter just isn't like a punching bag fest. I feel like that is less video gamey and a little more respectful for the players.
Sure, it doesn't come across that way. So
yeah. Yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about Mythic Actions. I hope I get that book and I could run like a Greek kind of mythology kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I may take a look, but I feel the Western mythologies have been a bit played out. I'm looking for something a little bit more.
Sure.
But we'll see how things go.
Okay. On the next slide, on slide 9, the necromancer is felled by the paladin's blade. He curses under his breath. So close to immortality. The book of rituals he's using falls to the floor, and this is when your wizard player interrupts you. He says he wants to continue the necromancer's research to become a lich. Uh-oh. What do? You can imagine a similar situation where one of your players gets bitten by a werewolf or becomes a vampire. It can be hard to adjudicate a situation like this. I know in the monster manual, there's just a template you can add to your character that makes them a vampire, but that's basically throwing a bunch of bonuses with some weaknesses that can be avoided, like disadvantage on attacks and saving throws in the sun. Your party is just going to go stop going out into the daylight, or they're going to get an umbrella. And even you enforce that whole they're irrevocably evil, then they just have to give up the character sheet, and that's not good either. In the game I run, you know what it is. I was gearing up for one of the players to become a vampire, due to their long lost parent being one. I made it so it was the end of their personal arc, and that was basically the reward for finishing their personal quest. However, at the time I'm currently writing this, I don't think that's going to happen. And I think that's okay. It made sense for her character to not become a vampire, and I would be okay with the power increase if she did. In my opinion, I think that's kind of the best way to do it. Make it some sort of reward in RPGs. No, that's the last panel. That's kind of more my style, though. I'm more used to my players being sort of a hodgepodge of weird non-humanoids. If you aren't, maybe you could work with your player to find out what they want from a template and try to work it with them. Maybe take away a couple things from the vampire, but slowly give it back every level up. You know, you can describe it as you find your combat power increase, but so does the curse in your blood. I know just talking to your player seems like a cop-out, but sometimes that's kind of the only good answer. Smitty, what do you think about your players becoming liches or vampires or something that isn't not the default character class?
I am pro non-default.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm all for it. In one of the campaigns I'm running right now, this player had a really cool idea where he was a like cursed, the spirit of like a cursed bard who had inhabited like multiple beings over like eons, and so like he had these kind of like memories of different things, and he was kind of sought and sought after by this fae who had cursed him, and it was a whole long thing. But his character died pretty early. They were in a dungeon crawl that had been set up for a while. One of the players couldn't show up that day, and there was a four-person party, so it left him undermanned. And then honestly, his other kind of two party mates left him a little bit exposed, and he got ganked in a way that really wasn't his fault. I couldn't really do anything about it. It would have been like putting a finger on the lever a little too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because of the backstory he had, I effectively like let him have that spirit transfer into the next host. And so he has these abilities now that kind of correspond to the original character of memories and powers and stuff, but now transferred to this new character who has its own set of things. So he's almost playing like a two entities inside of a single body. So it's been a little bit difficult to make it work at times from a kind of mechanical point of view, but from a story perspective, like it's the best thing probably we have going in the campaign right now.
That kind of reminds me of something, actually. Have you seen the 1998 film Fallen with Denzel Washington?
I have.
Okay, great. For those in the chat who are not in the know, Denzel Washington's greatest role is him as a investigator, where he has to pick up on a mysterious set of killings that were very close to the style of killings that of a serial killer who was recently executed and presumably is dead. But you find out that, like Smitty's character, that he sort of can like possess people as like a host. But unlike Smitty's player, he had the ability to like almost like quickly possess other people. And it's kind of like a cat and mouse game with Denzel Washington, where I think one of the scenes is him kind of in the crowd, and the serial killer is like touching a person on the shoulder to transfer his possession, and like you could just see like the chain of people just whipping around and like touching person on the shoulder as he's trying to like catch Denzel Washington. I always thought that was like a cool like kind of villain thing, but I've always been kind of like, how do I make this happen? I was actually a part of a forum that kind of rewrote 3.5 and some of their like prestige classes and classes and stuff, and they kind of, I think they solidified this into like the best version I think you could possibly do. It was like a pseudo lich where you had a sort of amulet or some sort of like ring or something where that was your like sign where if it was on you, that was the possessed person. And through using the magic jar spell, you can possess other creatures or other things and kind of like get some sort of like pseudo immortality from this. Um, I always thought that was a cool prestige class because like it wasn't really off the table for players. It just like it was more like there's a soft restriction to it where like I don't think I could ever pass that through a DM and be like, man, wouldn't it be cool if I took this prestige class?
Yeah. Again, it's them trying to think of ways to pass along some of those powers, but I think you never know what your players are going to come back with. So I think the message for me there is like it's possible. You just have to be smart about how you do it.
Exactly.
And maybe use something like that as a blueprint, not necessarily exactly the same, but see how they did it and make it into a workable mechanic, and then build around it. I just want to give a shout out to a series of books by author Wesley Chu. The first book is called, I think, The Lives of Tau, but it follows kind of two alien races that inhabit humans. And when one of the humans dies, that alien host can pass to a new human, or the alien passes to a new human host. And it's a pretty entertaining series of books, but it just made me think of it because you brought up the possibility.
Yeah. Now, I guess, Smitty, I believe you have something to say about villains and some sort of things of that nature.
I do. It's probably maybe going to be a little bit more than 13 minutes, so we'll see if I can go fast and what we can squeeze in. And if we can and we go over, Brett and I will be here. We hope you'll stay with us and feel free to ask some questions when we get there. But just wanted to make sure that all y'all, if you had like I don't know, cookies in the oven or something, you weren't waiting for me to finish as your timer, because people have done it before. All right, so yeah, let's jump to that next slide then. So, this brings us, as Brett said, to the villainous portion of the evening. We're going to talk a little bit about some different tricks and tools you can use to make your baddies more interesting. But I want to start with with a couple different ideas that I think are core to creating a compelling villain. Now, if you pay attention to just some of this, make sure it's this idea of these different archetypes that you can have as sort of your villain prototype. I think first and foremost, one of the ways to go about creating a compelling villain is to think through kind of their psychology and motivations. I think it can go a long way in making them a memorable character if you kind of flesh out why they're doing what they're doing. If you ask someone what makes someone a villain, they'll probably say something around doing evil things, hurting other people, whatever the case may be, and they'd be right. But if you ask them what makes them an interesting villain, many of them are going to point to kind of the reasons why they're doing those things. And if you don't provide your villain with that, you're going to kind of end up a little bland. So, Brett, you've got a dragon who's terrorizing a city. Interesting? Yeah?
Maybe.
Okay. What about a dragon who's terrorizing a city because of a deep-seated compulsion to hoard gold and jewels? Does that extra little tidbit make it a little bit more interesting?
I kind of assumed that, but yes.
Sure. Well, then what about a dragon who's terrorizing a city, hoarding the golden jewels because the dragon believes that money is just a construct, and that if we all would be better off if we could just return to a simpler collectivist society like the one the dragon was raised in before murderous, treasure-seeking adventurers destroyed their home and shattered their innocence. How about that, Brett? Would that be interesting?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, okay, appreciate that. But I think giving your villain a little bit of backstory like that, making their motivations to be something a bit more solidified, as opposed to like this villain does bad because villains are bad, makes your characters more invested in what they're going up against. That brings us to the second point here. You got to really get deep into their backstory, but like you can't pluck those motivations from the ether. You're not just like, oh, this person was spurned by a lover, or this person was insulted when they were a kid. You have to really kind of give care and connect it to what the campaign is about, what the players are going through. And it has to make sense. The scale of their misdeeds really should match the injury of their perceived slight or the gravity of their misguided notions. If you try to pair a serious villain with a silly rationale, the silly is going to win out, and your players are going to be laughing at the end boss that you've worked so hard on. We've all been in that situation where we're like, oh, we bring out this cool person who's got like this decked out robe and like crazy awesome powered tattoos and like a, you know, a super awesome name, and they're like standing there about to wreak havoc, and one of them is like, oh, is this the guy who's afraid of penguins? And then like the whole thing falls apart because you didn't really make them a cool awesome villain. You made them a very flimsy one. So you want to avoid that sort of letdown by really building out something, you know, something a little more concrete. Have you had that happen to you ever, Brett?
Not really. I usually find that it's hard for me to kind of the show not tell thing about villains, where I can't just have them like talk about how they're scared about penguins. Like you would have to have a penguin around for them to like recoil and fear at. So
right. Well, I think the goal was not to make the villain afraid of penguins, but I mean, yes, that's if you were going to do the show not tell, that would right, yeah.
Yeah, but and it's generally hard because the villains have a shelf life of 3 to 4 kind of rounds with if you're in like melee with the PCs, and it's like you kind of have to somehow like tell them about this villain without just like lore dumping them of like this villain is bad. You find a book and in this seat the villain talks about how he's a dragon and
yeah, and I think part of that is, you know, this villain doesn't have to be presented to them in a villainous situation all the time. You know, if they're coming up against you know, like a manticore, yeah, it's going to be a thing. But like, what was that? Horseman, yeah, exactly. If you're coming up against a thing, or maybe you're encountering them in a situation where like you wouldn't fight this person in, you know, quote unquote polite society, and maybe you're not even 100% sure they're a villain yet. You know, I think that can help you provide the space to show and not tell. One of the things I like to do in that realm is kind of align the motivations or the life experiences or whatever of the villain with the people, with the heroes, right? You know, that could have been me, you know, the idea I like to say is like, there but for the grace of God, or gods, if you're in one of our pantheon, there but for the grace of the gods goes I. You know, maybe without making 1 or 2 different life choices, the hero could have ended up like the villain. So getting the hero to see that and think that immediately puts the hero in the villain's shoes, and, you know, creates a little bit of empathy, but also a little bit more of a compelling situation for them there. If you really want your players to remember your villain, make the villain, or for this type of villain, make that type of villain a mirror for the motivations and choices of your own character, and then shatter the hell out of that mirror.
Oh, that's a good idea. I should have done
that. Let's jump to that next slide. Of course, there are other villains whose your players are going to remember simply because of their ridiculously entertaining antics, personalities, etc. Their crimes don't even need to be that big, as long as their personality is. Maybe they aren't planning, or maybe they're planning a regicide, or maybe they're just selling some bogus potions. But no matter what they're doing it in style. And I think that is where a lot of us, that's I think where a lot of DMs go with their villains. They make them big and outsized, which is great. And I think that is it's an easier trope, which is why I think a lot of people get into it, and I'm supportive of it. But there's a couple of things you want to keep in mind when you're doing it, I think. First, you need to figure out what your hero is like, because if you're making a big outsized villain, but it's something that your heroes think is like lame or uninteresting or whatever, they're not going to find that big, huge personality enticing. They're going to find it irritating. So, you know, observe your players, talk to them during their session zeros, whatever the case may be, and figure it out. You know, what do the characters do when they have downtime? What are the NPCs? What types of NPCs do they gravitate towards? Do they hang out in certain, you know, taverns? Basically, like, what would the adventuring party's ideal ally look like? Aim for that, then make them evil, and make them like evil and with a big personality that plays on those things. And if you've decided to go this route, and you're hoping to grab your players' interests with your villain's winning personality, you probably don't want to be that subtle. I think when you're going with kind of like the motivated, nuanced, you know, villain of the previous slide, sure, subtlety is great. But for these villains, you got to go over the top, because that subtle personality is going to be drowned out by the big personalities that adventuring parties almost always have. Adventuring parties aren't kind of known for being quiet, normal, lost in a crowd type groups. So you want to make sure if you're going to entice them with a big villain personality, you have to get big. You don't need to necessarily like have some great evil monologue, but maybe put a couple of one-liners in the hopper so you can pull them out when you need to. Have something that is going to catch their attention when the villain enters the field. And it's not just about the personality. You want to make their plans that way too. It's not just a scheme, it's a performance. Maybe the villain coordinates a fireworks display in town at the same time they're robbing a bank to distract the townsfolk, but also because they like the spectacle. Or maybe they make time in between their devious plans to play practical jokes on the heroes just to kind of needle them a little bit. Doing stuff like that, I think, is another takeaway that the players will love. But no matter what path you take, the key is creating that spectacle, whether it be by personality or by schemes. Don't wait for them to come to your villain. Put your villain front and center and put in a show for your players. Thoughts?
I generally have a hard time coming up with motivations my party could sympathize with. I think, or not, but not too sympathetic, because I ran a Water Deep Dragon Heist and I had Draxel as my villain. Spoilers, I guess, for people who haven't read that yet, but in the book, I kind of made him seem very friendly and like very like eager to help the players, and never really saying his like motivations for it. And so like they thought he was their ally, and so when he was helping them with like doing all these things to help them like find the vaults so they could find the treasure and stuff, and eventually he's like, yeah, we'll split it, because I'm helping you so much, like you take like 10%, I'll do the lion's share because I'm doing most of the legwork. And they're like, yeah, like that sounds great. And so having them do this like big performance, you kind of want them to be wowed by it, but not fantasy fanatical about them, because if they're having this fun fireworks display in the town, you don't want them to be like, oh yeah, this guy is like kind of part of us, like he's
Right.
like one of our, and
it's tough. I think that's. I'll talk about that a little bit later in one of my last points. But I think you have to walk a fine line. But I think there's definitely players. There's lines your players won't cross, and
yeah,
players walk right up to that line, and your villain just dances right over it. And that's the point where the heroes say, "Oh wait, we can't be friends with this guy."
yeah.
And that makes for some compelling conflict there. Let's jump to the next slide. Thank you, Jordan. The last type of villain I want to discuss is the type of villain that's like so out there, so alien, so different to the hero, so they can't even fathom how to communicate with it, let alone how to combat it. This takes away one of the hero's greatest assets, their greatest comfort points, which is playing to their strengths. Maybe the villain isn't fazed by physical attacks. Maybe the villain is only manifesting in the hero's dreams, and they haven't yet figured out how to attack back, but in the meantime are getting driven to exhaustion because they can't sleep. Perhaps the only way they confront the enemy is in a completely foreign environment where the heroes can't even rely on their senses in the same way, where they can't easily retreat. If you create a villain and an environment that is completely unlike anything your heroes have seen before, you're already putting them on edge and setting up an epic encounter. But I think you can go even further here. You can sort of add little touches to make the villain even creepier. Like think of all those movies where the human body distorts and they run on all fours in like really creepy ways, right? Like I think no one watching that is like, this is cool. Like you're freaked out by it because it's that kind of like uncanny valley of things that you're like, it's just unsettling. It's just absolutely unsettling. And I think if you think that way and add those little flares to your villain, you also get that eeriness. So think about like external effects. If you're, even if you're in person or you're online, you can use dissonant sounds emitted when the villain's near, or maybe like lights flicker and go out when they approach. Consider playing with scale and forcing all the characters into tiny constrained areas, or put them in wide open spaces with nowhere to hide. You don't necessarily need this to be a encounter with an outcome. You just need to be you need this to be an encounter with a message. So if you think about that, it's not necessarily like an end battle. It's pushing the villain's agenda and scaring the crap out of the heroes and making them somebody that the heroes think about, talk about, plot about when you're not there, because they've made that indelible mark on your heroes and your players. All right, so let's jump to the next slide, and I wanted to just bring up some examples of these types of heroes. So the first one, I think, in sort of someone whose motivations can be very kind of aligned, and you can say, this makes sense. I totally agree with what this person is trying to accomplish, but maybe, I'm getting lost on their methods or something like that. That's, for me, is like quintessentially Eric Killmonger, right? Like, I think watching that film, you all say like, yeah, I get it. I mean, heck, even Black Panther like adopts kind of what he was trying to do and what he was calling for at the end of the movie, right? Like,
Yeah.
But he's a foil. He's a counter, but he draws you in. And I think creating your villain in that sense is going to really get your heroes to talk about them, just like we talked about Killmonger after the encounter, after the campaign, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
The second one, obviously, is the Joker, somebody whose personality, whose name of the game is spectacle. You never really know what Joker's motivations are other than just like causing chaos. And one of the things, and I put Heath Ledger's Joker up here specifically because I love that in the movie when he's talking about his backstory, he's just like, there's just like 3 or 4 different backstories he makes up during it. And it's clear, like, you don't know. You have no idea who this person is, why they're doing what they're doing. They're just sowing chaos, but they're doing it in this like amazingly over the top way. And that's what's drawing you in towards them, is just their showmanship, really. Completely evil, but damn fun to watch. The third one, for the alien, I put the xenomorph from Alien, because it's creepy. It is creepy as hell watching that movie. I mean, the first movie, right? It's not an action movie like the second one. It's a horror suspense film, and mostly suspense. It's creepy and scary, but like, what's out there, but it's not on screen for like a ton of time. You're just walking through narrow corridors with dripping water, lights are flickering, and you're scared out of your mind. Because you don't know what this thing is, you don't know what's driving, and you don't know how to defeat it, and you're thinking you're probably going to be dead, because it's just so beyond anything that you've encountered before, and you can't leave easily because you're on a spaceship. So I think putting your players in that environment where they're just so uncomfortable with the environment, and uncomfortable in a way that is they're consenting to. Don't take that as license to be words I can't say on this stream. But talk to your players. Talk to your players about what they're okay with, and then kind of play on that and work that into the game. Let's jump to the next one. So here I'm going to talk just a little bit to wrap a few things up with a few additional tools for creating engaging foes. First, I think that players tend to think their characters are moving forward while everyone else, including your villain, is standing still. But a compelling villain will challenge that assumption. Don't make your villain a high-level character who just sits there waiting in their throne room for your heroes to get strong enough to face them. Consider introducing your villain at a lower level. That would still be, a difficult battle for your players, but someone they can see kind of progress, gain resources, level up alongside them. So they know the villain's amassing powers as well. They can see some decisions the villain is making. They can see how the villain is reacting to what they're doing. And then you can start really kind of making that interplay of conflict. Like maybe their henchmen are coming out and fighting the players, but the players know who the real villain is. You can have some close scrapes where maybe there's some risky escapes on both sides. Maybe in those moments you have a chance for a little bit of that show not tell. Mm-hmm. And the next thing there is the common causes. Maybe by introducing your hero earlier, you have a chance for them to align, if only for a little bit. So maybe there is a greater threat out there, at least a temporary one, that they need to line up for. So that, to your point earlier, Brett, I think, maybe they have to get that treasure because they're, whatever, they need something in it to repel this evil thing. But at the end of the day, that thing's going to be gone and someone's still going to have that item. And if the villain has that item, the heroes know they're going to use it to wreak havoc, right? So
villain stuff.
So like that alliance can only last for so long. but put them in that situation where they have to do it for the greater good, right? Like, where not partnering with that villain doesn't just make it harder, it makes it like there's actual outcomes from that decision that are harmful to their own goal in a way that, sticks them in the morals, as it were. And then last but not least, if you are a GM that loves a good reveal, consider changing up what that looks like. I think a lot of people try to hide the identity of the big bad, but that can fall flat super easily, especially if the players guess that identity like 3 sessions in and they're like, oh crap. Or worse yet, I think, when you do make the reveal, they aren't at all invested in who the big bad is. They're like, wait, who is that again? Was it the farmer from like 20 sessions ago? That's not what you want to hear when you've been building up this encounter to, to be your big reveal. So think about making it something else. Everyone knew the big bad was the big villain was a Baroness, but you don't know her secret motivation, and that turns out to be something that, if the players had known it earlier, maybe they could have stopped her from doing all these terrible things. But they were so focused on the Baroness and so focused on the villain and not the why, that they overlooked it. And then you left them in a situation with like, oh man, like we could have prevented this from spiraling out so much earlier. Or the whole time you've been fighting the evil lord of the Broken Mountains, you never realized that your friendly tavern keeper NPC was the secret spy for the Mountain Lord. You kind of stick them in the gut with that one. I think one of the best ways to make this work is to purposely draw the player's attention to some other simpler reveal, so they get excited when they figure it out and fail to realize that the main villainous mystery is as of yet unresolved. So that bit of misdirection, distraction, old magician style, to keep your players being like, I know what's going on, I know what the trick is here. No, you don't, and you're going to really get excited by the fact that you don't, 5 sessions from now. So that's really what I have for creating interesting villains. I know we are a bit over time and we've got some wrap up, but I did want to make sure we offered anyone who stuck with us the opportunity to ask some questions or bring up anything they wanted to chat about. And if you don't have those, that's okay. We can riff for a bit while we wait for you to compose them. But what's a good panel without a few Q&A moments?
Exactly. I know Lucha was writing in chat if you had any villains that turned towards the good side and joined the party.
Yes, I have. But that is like you were talking about the villainous powers as a reward. To me, so is the villainous betrayal or villainous redemption, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The players have to work for that by real difficult RP. They have to find those moments to subvert the villain's motivations to turn them over to the good side. And I love it when they do that. But if you don't make that character someone with motivations that the players can, play upon, then that heel turn is just like it's capricious. You're just making the call to do it for no reason.
Yeah.
So Lucha, I totally think that's an awesome tact to take, but make it something the players have to work for. It doesn't even need to be like a 1-for-1 exchange where someone is like, well, if you do this thing and you get the wand, the villain will come to your side. Like that's just another side quest. I think you have to make it about understanding the motivations. Brett, like seriously, with the Bloodlord and our show on Tuesdays, Geek Attack, which I know Brett said he couldn't mention anymore, but I still can. There was a side mission there, but the side mission had motivations behind it, right? Like it wasn't just bring me this wand, it was bring me the love of my life, effectively. And I think, that's what made it more compelling. I don't know if you were referencing that, but for me, that, I wanted to point that out because it was both, right? So I think it played out well.
I was more referring to the horseman encounter where they kind of had a heel turn, and maybe I could have done the heel turn better to be more effective, but it was kind of like a tense moment for kind of like no reason, and it seems like
yeah, I think we come to these panels and we want to be like, no man, like you did great, and like you are great, but I buy into that there because honestly, everyone in the party doesn't believe it. And I don't think we believe it because we don't understand what their motivations are for doing it. I think we all think they still have sinister motivations. So you say that like, oh, I could have made that heel turn better. And I'm like, what heel turn? I think they're still like
Oh,
plotting against us, as evidenced by the fact that none of us trust Tomlin at this point.
I did that intentionally, just as planned.
Yeah.
See, guys, the trick is to just not know what you're doing.
I think I inadvertently just caused one of our small parties of allies to turn on us in our final battle. Sorry, team.
Oh, wow.
Jordan,
not the first time.
Our producer, shout out to Jordan, asks, hasn't happened to me, but what do you do when deciding to introduce them? I had a friend that introduced a character and the party killed him immediately. When do you decide to reveal? Yeah, well, don't do it in a situation where the characters are motivated to kill the person right off the bat, or that they're in a position to do it. I think that, if you're going to introduce your big bad right away, you can't have them walk in like as a first level character in the third session and be like, haha, I'm going to take over the world. No, the players are just going to stab them. They have to be, a little bit OP. Doesn't have to be like 20th level and the players are first level, but maybe they're like a 6th or 7th level and the players are first or second level. Maybe they've surrounded by henchmen. Maybe it's in a, at like a noble feast where the players aren't really sure who's allied with who. So they think if they draw swords at this point, it could be a bloodbath against them. Do it in a way that it's precarious so that they get to meet the villain without being confident in their chances of survival should they take him on right then. I think that answers the question of how not to have your villain killed pretty early. When to introduce them, I mean, it's story driven. I think you want to see, like, does it make sense? Like, you don't want to have your villain just show up and be like, hi, I'm here, and there's nothing going on in town this day, but I'm just drinking at the bar. If the villain, whose motivations you've already plotted out, if the motivations don't align with them going to the village and drinking the beer, it's out of character for them, and it sets up the players maybe thinking or making the wrong assumptions about the villain, but they're just following the breadcrumbs that you've laid out. So that's not really fair to them. So if you do introduce that villain early, make sure they're nigh close to invulnerable, and make sure that it's with purpose and meaning that's only going to help the heroes make their decision about engaging that villain later, an easier one to make.
Well said. I'm the mechanics guy, so I defer to you.
What else we got from the audience? Surely there's some question out there. You can ask us about anything. You can ask Brett about his favorite maple syrup. Someone brought it up in chat earlier. It wasn't a...
Of course, now the questions are flooding in. Let me handle the Lucha one and you handle the Jordan one. How about that?
Okay.
If you throw the reinforcements into battle, if you, as a DM, feel the party had it too easy with a specific fight, well said. I think I do that. I think that's a good tactic because sometimes you feel that your villain or your encounter is going too easy, and you need reinforcements to kind of put your thumb on the scale as is. I know I specifically brought up when I did that very recently, with only a couple weeks ago, where Smitty apprehended the villain way too early, and I needed the encounter be a little more not much of a punching bag. So I definitely do it all the time.
Yeah. I think just to add on to that, like, if your characters have your big bad down to like 20% of their health and they haven't taken a scratch and you don't have any like legendary actions or something in the tank, bring in your reserves. You can always bring out maybe their reserves are like struggle to put on their armor quickly because they ran in and they heard there was a fight, so you lower their AC or something. It doesn't have to be like an overwhelming force. It just has to be at the right time. Jordan's question about actually scroll back up because I had it, and then Lucha asked his maple syrup question. Let's see. Oh yeah, with a large campaign, does it make sense to have mirror villains for the characters, or one big one that ties everyone together? Should they be linked or separate? It can be whatever you want it to be. I think with Geek Attack and knowing that it was going to be like a 6-month campaign, I think Brett went about it the right way, in that all of us had to kind of walk our own paths, have our own little backstories introduced, find our villains, even if like they're even like just mildly aligned with the overarching plan, like they had to be there for a reason. So I think that he did go about it the right way. I think for larger arcs or larger campaigns, you can have character arcs where folks are confronting their individual villains. It doesn't need to be like, okay, well, now it's time for player X to go in and fight their specific villain right now. But I think it can be that, like, if a player likes a certain kind of battle, or one player is more into like the psychology of the villain, or like investigation or whatever, you can kind of make your villainous encounters align with the individuals that are in your party. And then in terms of tying them into the overall plot, like usually in a lot of campaigns, there's some like world altering event, right? And baddies are usually pulling in the same direction, whether they know it or not. So there's always a bit of like a loose affiliation there, even if it's stated. So you can tie those threads together if you think there's value in it, but I don't think it's necessary.
I say why not both? You could have minor villains that kind of tie everyone together, but you could also have a major villain that kind of like, it's more behind the scenes, and I'm just trying to like explain what I'm doing right now and try to pretend that I know what I'm doing.
No, I think it works well, and you can do that, but they don't all have to be. And what's a cooler or a cool trick to do is, like, there's two big bads, and the two big bads are at loggerheads with each other, and half your party is aligned against the goals of one of the big bads, and your other half of your party is aligned against the other, and then they got to be like, hey, like, we're going to fight your guy, but that's going to make it easier for the guy that I'm against to run rampant. Yeah. So put your players in almost like a crossfire. Just anything to make them sort of think about their own motivations, think about their own goals, and what they're willing to sacrifice to get what their character wants.
I dig it. Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
I mean, that's the ongoing Thread Raiders, question. I feel like people are very adamant in this debate. Like, if I have to pick a side, I'll pick no pineapple. But like, I've had pineapple on pizza and it's okay, but like, I don't think it's the end all be all pizza topping choice like some folks think.
Well, to be the contrarian view, in college, me and my friend would get Hawaiian pizza basically every other day. So I would have to say yes for pineapple on pizza.
But like, it's Canadian pizza.
Yes.
So like, how is it different?
I was repping the Canada with the Hawaiian pizza. I don't know why it's.
I mean, what do you like? Is it on like mousse? Like what are the no? Okay. So
I get what you're trying to do, but you have to kind of earn it a bit.
Yeah, no, I know. It just kind of, Peter, I expected you to have an earlier reaction, but you didn't, so I just kept going with it.
It's on a baguette. It's on a Chesterfields. It's on a donut.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
It's on a Montreal bagel, which is really just a donut. Have you ever had your players be the villains the whole time? I've toyed with that in the past, but I've always been a little bit afraid to do it because you don't want to like take the wind out of their sails and have them feel like they were the heroes the whole time. They did this whole campaign. They think that they're like the anointed ones. And at the end, you're like, haha, just kidding. Like, all of these people you've been slaying have been a peaceful civilization. You're really colonizers. You're jerks. I think that can be tough and a hard pill for some folks to swallow because they are doing this for escapism and they don't want to feel bad about their choices in that way. So I would be careful if you do that, but I do think you can do it on a smaller scale. In one of my games, I had these players break into a manor house and they escaped and they were confronted by someone in the yard, but it was like a quick moving situation. And the rogue cut off the guy's arm and it was a gardener. And they got out of there, but like it was apparent to him afterwards that it was a gardener. And then I had that player like show up again and again in the background as like a beggar on the streets. He had lost his job. Like later on, it turned out he lost his family. He was just going through like a real rough patch, all because of what the rogue had done. And the rogue, like as one of his side missions, became to like fund this person's like return to a good lifestyle. So he like started like funneling money into getting him like medical treatments and then like reestablished in a career, and it became kind of a fun thing because the rogue really didn't want to be the bad guy.
Yeah, like the Waterdeep game I was running, eventually they just kind of let the villain win, I guess. They're working for Draxel, and eventually they just kind of let him take all the money. And in the book, it's revealed that he's would use the money to like basically bribe to become one of the closed lords of Waterdeep, and then he would kind of run rampant with everything. But I didn't want to ever tell my players about this part because I feel like they'd be like, oh, we're doing all this stuff, it's great, and then they kind of like, again, like you said, you kind of take the wind out of their sails. So I was always kind of concerned, like maybe I should just keep quiet and make them think they're the heroes.
Yeah. I think Lucha asked, I think both Brett and I are more than happy to be approached later about DMing stuff. So please do. Obviously, we're just two people who got up here to do this. I think, probably there's half the people in the chat have more knowledge and experience than we do about this stuff. So by all means, just reach out in general to the Thread Raider community. There's so many great ideas there about running games, building characters, creating, compelling storylines. So please do reach out to us, reach out to your fellow Thread Raiders. And I know we're coming up in the end. So do you want to jump to the last or the next slide, which I think is the last? And Brett, you can feel free to take us out.
I don't remember what's on the last slide. I think it's the outro one, I guess.
It's the conclusion and closing thoughts.
Okay. Yeah. Well, like Ucha said, are we approachable for more questions on DMing? I could say you could find us at Geek Attack. You could find me specifically at Tengu2. You could find Smitty at PBSmitty for all your DMing questions. And yes, Lucha, with the shilling comes us talking about Geek Attack on Tuesdays at 9:30 EST, and you could find next week's encounter with the Burning of Brindle. Oh, there you go. That's its episode title. Yeah. With a red dragon, which it's probably going to be exciting. Smitty, do you have any closing words?
No, I want to thank everyone for joining us, for chiming in with some questions. Obviously, I think Brett and I would talk about this stuff even if nobody was sticking around to watch it because we find it interesting. But it's super interesting to get everyone else's thoughts, questions, feedback, because this at its root is a community where we all love to have fun. So adding more people to it, more ideas, only expands that possibility for all of us. Not only can you see us on Tuesday, but you can find Lucha usually in the chat because Lucha's a diehard. Thanks, Luch. And you can find both Brett and I later this weekend on Saturday. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, our producer is saying that you can find the pre-show tomorrow starts at 3:30. So definitely you should be sticking around for this channel for more awesome goodness of games and talking and all that fun stuff. And additionally, I guess we could reveal now that Geek Attack Season 2 will be coming soon. So if you want to see more Geek Attack, there's going to be more coming after this campaign ends.
That's true. Not only will there be a Season 2, there'll be a little bit of a post show where we do some reveals of our own about what happened behind the scenes. But also there'll be some one-shots, or a one-shot, I believe, DM'd by our wonderful producer. But yeah, the pre-show starts tomorrow at 3:30, as you said. Our additional appearances this weekend will be Saturday at 4 o'clock, I think. I should know because I'm DMing the game. It is Little Ducklings Go to War, where you will learn all about how the end of the world may fall upon the small town of Green Lawn, unless Brett and his band of heroes can turn the tide. And then I think both of us as well are in a game on Sunday evening, which starts at 8 o'clock? 8. Okay. 8. Where Jeremy will be running us through a World of Darkness, a super creepy game. You can find out both of our really weird character. I don't know. I know what Brett's is, but he doesn't know what mine is. So I don't want to give away anything here.
I thought you would have, like, when you said, like, yeah, I'm not going to go with your suggestion, man. I'm like, okay. And then you didn't say anything, and I'm like, okay.
I kind of know. I'll let you know before we go.
Okay.
But I didn't have it fleshed out. I came to the game late, and Brett was being very kind and trying to offer that the two of us could be like a a pair of
Siamese
siblings or
twins.
something, and
Yeah.
you know, we could have sort of offsetting powers. And I was like, that's a great idea. And then like 10 minutes later, after he showed me his character, I was like, no, he's a great character, but like, I don't think I want to be the opposite of it. And then I went in a totally different direction. So,
Yeah.
but I do appreciate you helping me out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's enough of us talking about ourselves. Take us out, Brad.
Again, you can find us at Geek Attack. Interview. Our producer tomorrow. You can find me specifically. I'm going to be interviewed by Vital Hits. I didn't forget. It's just that I was waiting for Smitty to let me take over. And
I think the cue where I said "take it away, Brett" was that cue.
yeah, no, I don't know if that was it. Anyway, so you could find they're going to be interviewing several people over the next couple days. I will be being interviewed at 9:30, 9-ish. My producer is giving me some looks.
7:30.
7:30. Oh, geez. Okay, I guess I should prepare for that. And I would be happy for everyone to attend to watch that, I guess. If you like this panel, you'll be sure to like that.
If anyone has a panel in self-promotion, please let Brett know when it is so that he can attend.
I have a lot to learn about that.
All right, everyone.
Yeah, let's take it out before I do any more damage.
Thanks so much for joining us.